Salut everyone! I know it's been a while since we posted anything on this channel, but life's been keeping us all busy, so happy to be back! Death Cosplays has actually made a request of us today that she wanted to see a tutorial on how to make my mini top hats. And being the nice guy that I am, I couldn't say no. So everybody gather up some of your sewing supplies because this is gonna be good.
Step 1. Supplies for starting off. To start off, you need thread, needles, scissors, a pencil for marking your guides, your choice of color in any material you choose. I personally choose felt because I think it works best, and an optional guide. I personally find it helps making the circles, but you don't need one. It's all up to you. The first thing that I do when making my mini top hats is I trace the brim of my guide. That way I'll have a perfect circle. But if you don't have a guide, or you choose not to use one, all you need to know is that it's 5.5 inches around all the way. All you have to do is cut in a perfect circle. And draw one first, of course. It helps. The next thing I do is cut out the brim from the fabric. If you feel your brim is too flimsy, you can double up the fabric by cutting out 2 at a time, but I personally only use 1. That way I can have an option of how I want it to lay down across my hair. Don't forget, you're going to be adding a clip to the bottom of this at the end, so don't add too much. After I do that, what I tried to do is, well, what you can do is if you have a guide, you can trace the top. However, I find that doesn't always work for me, given the example that you're seeing in front of you. So, instead, what I do is I cut the fabric down and measure my guide. For those of you who are wondering, the top of the hat is 2 3/4 inches long, but you'll want to cut it a bit bigger than that. That way you'll have some room to sew it down onto the length of the hat. Ordinarily, I would have recommended a guide to cut across, but since I've got some experience working with these hats, seeing as this is my 3rd one I'm making, I went freehand on cutting. However, if you're new to this, I would recommend an at least 4-inch circle template. That way you will have a perfect circle, and a little extra to help with the sewing later on. Next, we make the body of the hat, or the part of the hat that holds the brim and the top together. It's roughly 10 3/4 inches around, but I rounded it up to 11. That way I'd have enough room for the sewing later on. The length, going up and down, is roughly 1 3/4 inches. You want to get that measurement right though. No rounding there. Make sure you have enough fabric in front of you, and try and cut it as evenly as possible. What I would recommend is marking a few guides on your fabric, and then measuring it out with a ruler. I know it kind of sounds like how you made those margins on your pages in elementary school, but it helps with a straight line. Step 2. Putting it all together. For materials here, what you'll need are your needles and pins, thread, scissors, your cutout pieces from before, and some fluff to stuff the hat. I know it sounds rather odd, but I find it helps make my hats more resilient to frying pan attacks. What you'll want to do next is fold around your body of the hat, and then try and line it up according to the circle template you made for the top. What you want to do with that is you want to make it so that the top overhangs ever so slightly, that way you can tuck it in later and sew it. Then, pin the 2 pieces together and trim off any extra pieces that may have been left being a little too long along the sides, and any that might be hanging off a little bit on the inside. You'll want it to hang off on the inside, that way you can cut it off. Now, it's finally sewing time. I'll just let you watch this since it's a little long. luckily, this is the part where my camera decided it was going to be dumb and the batteries died, so you're going to have to bear with me a minute while I find new batteries for my camera. Next, you're going to want to slide the top piece through the freshly sewn body of your hat. Then, pin it along the edges. You may need to have it stick out at some sides during this, but that's okay, as long as you can tuck them back in and it looks presentable at the end. Make sure all of the pins are holding it firmly, because that's where you're going to be sewing right after. Once all of the pins are in place, sew the top on firmly, and then proceed to the next step. Once you're done with that, add some stuffing to the top part of your hat. You can stuff it until you think it's fit, but don't overstuff it, otherwise there will be a bulge at the bottom, and it won't sit very nicely once you're done. Once done with that, line it up on the base of your hat, and then pin it down, ever so slightly, trying not to bring too much of the body down with it. It might take a little while to line it up in the middle, so feel free to pull out the pins as many times as you need to. Once pinned and centered, you can move on to sewing it down, being careful not to bring down too much of the body while you're sewing. Once you're done with that, it's time to decorate. Step 3. Decoration. For this step, you'll need the finished hat that you've just made, needles and thread, if you prefer sewing your decorations on, scissors, ribbons, button, and a hairpin, or hot glue, if you prefer gluing it. If you're sewing your ribbons on, you can skip this step, but if you're using hot glue like I did, plug in your hot glue gun, and then set it down on a hard surface to heat up. Then, sew or glue down your first length of ribbon, right along the bottom, that way you can hide your seam. Once you're done with that, then it's time to add the other 2 lengths of ribbon. If you had a little extra hanging off the edge like I did, then that's no problem. Just give it a trim. Make sure you start and end gluing in the back where your seam is. That way, people won't notice it. Next, turn your hat to the proper side. That way the seam is in the back. And glue or sew down your ribbons, making sure the button is on top, covering the seam where you left your ribbons to overlap. Then, for the final step, you will take whatever hairpin you decided to use for this. In this case, I used a bobby pin, and either glue or sew down securely. Bobby pins, as I said, work best with glue, but if you have a different hairpin, it's up to your judgment what you think will hold the strongest. When setting your pins, make sure you do everything you can to try and keep them centered. Otherwise, you might end up with a bit of a lopsided sitting hat. And, well, we all know we want this to look good. Remember, if you are using hot glue like I was, always remember to unplug your hot glue gun and leave it on the same hard surface to cool. We don't want to put your hot glue gun away hot, or leave it plugged in. Once your workstation is clean, all supplies are put away, the glue is dry, or your hairpin is sewed down securely, Your new hat is now ready for wear. And that is how you make one of my mini top hats. Now I'm gonna turn it over to Norway because he's got some tips for all of you Denmark cosplayers on how to make a Denmark hat based on some of my instructions. So have fun with that! Tusen tack, Romania. Alright. Pretty much all you have to do for making Denmark's hats, since I'm sure I've got a lot of you Denmark cosplayers out there wondering how to do that, is just follow Romania's steps up until the part where he sewed the brim on. He did a good job, but if you want to do Denmark's hat, one, the bottom is optional, though I would still recommend it. That way you won't have to go crazy with the bobby pins. Now, what you would want to do is cut a length the same length around as this, but about half the height. Then you'd glue it down. If you felt that was too thin, double it up. Feel free. And then glue the button on the side. Then you have a perfect replica of Denmark's hat ready for use. Just in time for those cons, since I know a lot of you are waiting till the last minute to do this. Now I do believe that's it. Take care, enjoy these tutorials, and hope to see what you guys make.